Alright, Gabe Cook here, going to talk with you about an update to the Barack Obama politics disadvantage. Now, we put out this argument at the end of December for some teams traveling to the Dowling tournament. And the argument goes something like this: Barack Obama is trying to get an economic stimulus plan passed as soon as he possibly can. The affirmative team will derail Obama's efforts to get an economic stimulus plan passed, and that will turn our current recession into a depression, because evidence suggests that without a huge stimulus, the American economy is going to get much, much worse. There's been some new events that update the evidence and a little bit updates the argument itself in terms of how the links work. I'm going to try and talk that through with you. You'll be able to find this file that I'm referring to under Debate Resources, and you'll need a password in order to be able to access that. You can ask your coach for the password, or you can email me at cookgabe@umkc.edu. Alright, so that's kind of the setup for our discussion. I want to talk to you about the argument in the file. On the first page of the file, you obviously have the index. It's going to direct you to the shell, which is on page 3 and 4. And you'll read the shell in the first negative constructive, and what the shell does is it lays out the basic arguments you need. Alright, the basic story of the disadvantage. Alright, so the disadvantage is a negative consequence of the affirmative plan. This particular negative consequence is that the affirmative plan is going to prevent President-elect Barack Obama from passing a massive economic stimulus bill when he becomes President Barack Obama. It goes something like this. It begins with some evidence from the LA Times that says Obama has really put his focus on getting an economic stimulus plan passed, and he says it's important that we pass it really within the first few days he takes office. And he believes that it's critical it happens now, or else the economy may slide into a depression. Now, what will this stimulus plan include? What is the stimulus plan? Well, it's going to have tax cuts geared at the middle class. About $300 billion worth is what's being speculated. It's also going to have money for infrastructure development, so bridges and road repair, and the hope is that that creates jobs. And a huge part of this economic stimulus plan is going to be alternative energy development. That's right. Barack Obama is going to do a big part of this year's topic within days of taking office, or so he hopes. Now, here's the problem. Here's what we call the link story. That is that the affirmative plan will disrupt this whole process for Barack Obama. You see, if anything happens like an alternative energy bill passing the current Congress, which is controlled by Democrats, it's going to seem like Obama had his hands in it. And it's also going to seem like a first step for this stimulus package. Alright? If Barack Obama wants a whole lot of money for alternative energy in an economic stimulus bill, and Congress were to suddenly provide a bunch of money for renewable energy incentives, it would seem like they had just taken the first step in passing his stimulus package. Well, this is a problem. The first piece of link evidence from the Washington Post says Republicans want to be consulted. They want to spend the next couple weeks talking, not acting, so they're going to feel steamrolled and surprised by this first maneuver. Now, that's a problem because our Chicago Tribune evidence, the second link evidence, says that the Republicans, if they get mad, they can filibuster the stimulus plan. Now, you might be wondering what I just said. They can filibuster the stimulus plan. Well, if you don't know what filibuster means, I suggest you Google it. All right? It's a good word to know because it's really helpful when it comes to politics disadvantages. So basically, we've got a scenario where the Republicans are angry and they are blocking Obama from getting a stimulus plan passed, all because the affirmative plan came along and sort of played Obama's cards before he really wanted to. Finally, there's some helper evidence from Salon.com that says really just Obama rushing into action is going to doom him to failure. The impact evidence is pretty good. It says that if we don't pass an economic stimulus plan soon, 10 million people will lose their jobs. And then there's some evidence from Leonard Silk that just explains why a strong economy is important. Alright, When you have bad economic times, you're more likely to see bigotry, you can see riots, you don't invest as much money in helping the environment, and it's just generally a worse world to live in. And you can take that a little bit further. If you go into the file, you can find evidence that says if we have an economic collapse, it can cause a nuclear war and all this kind of stuff, depending on how you debate and where you want to take the argument. Alright, now we should briefly discuss how you can answer the argument. Well, one thing you always want to do with politics disadvantages is just make some common sense responses. You know, point out that there are sure a heck of a lot of links in the chain here to get to your final argument. We go from our bill being passed to taking away Obama's focus to angering Republicans to filibustering, you know, so there's all these steps before we finally get to some great economic devastation. Alright, you could also argue that at worst, the affirmative plan will come along, and really it just means that maybe the stimulus plan gets delayed. Alright, even if the Republicans get mad, so what? The Obama stimulus plan takes a couple weeks to pass. You know, what does a couple weeks really matter? I don't think 10 million people are going to lose their jobs in 2 weeks. You can also find evidence in the file under the AF answer section that says the Obama stimulus plan is going to take 2 years before it starts creating any jobs anyway. Alright? So it's not like this plan is going to step in and immediately fix all our problems. You'll also find evidence that says a bad economy doesn't result in war, and it doesn't result in all these terrible atrocities that the negative team may predict. So hopefully there's a few arguments that you can make if you're on the affirmative and somebody runs this disadvantage against you. I would suggest reading through this file and having it at your disposal if you wish to use it at the city championship. I would highlight the evidence, and I would check out the overview on page 2, because basically it takes what I just said and puts it down on paper. You could read that overview in the debate round. I would read it in the second negative constructive or the first negative rebuttal. And to prepare for when you're on the affirmative, I would go through the answer section. I might look for some additional evidence, and really on both sides of this argument I would do some additional research over the next couple days. Like I said, you'll find this argument under the debate resources section. You will need a password to access it. I hope that it's useful for you, and I hope to see everybody at the city championship. We're very excited. Take care.